You're Jan Frederick Olsen of 10 Rathbone Way, Fulchester.
I am, yes.
What is your nationality, Mr. Olsen?
I'm British. I was born in Sweden, but I have been a naturalized Briton for 12 years now. No, 13.
Yes, I see. Do you know the accused in this case, Anthony Graham Allardyce?
Yes, I know Tony Allardyce well enough. We work for the same firm.
Yes, what firm is that, Mr. Olsen?
Westway Chemicals. He is the personnel manager at the Fulchester Works, and I'm a research chemist there.
Yes, thank you. Now, I want to come to a particular date, which is February the 24th of this year. Did you see Mr. Allardyce at work on that day?
Oh, yes. It was the lunch hour. I was in what we call the experimental laboratory. There were one or two new processes, which reached a rather difficult stage, and I had to keep an eye on them while the other staff were away. Mr. Allardyce came in and asked me for some morphia.
He asked you for some morphia?
Yes. He said he had an old dog who was sick and needed putting down, so he was asking me to help him by letting him have some morphia.
Yes, is a certain amount of morphia kept in the experimental laboratory?
Oh, it's a natural alkaloid. We use limited amounts in certain patterns we manufacture.
Yes. And how did you respond to Mr. Allardyce's request, Mr. Olsen?
Of course, I told him it was quite impossible. There are, after all, regulations about things like drugs. But he kept insisting. So I had to keep refusing. In the end, it was a bit embarrassing.
Yes, but in any event, you made it quite clear to him that under no circumstances would you give him any morphia. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Though, on the other hand, I don't blame him for what he did, you know. It must have been terrible to have a wife as sick as she was.
Mister.
Today in the Crown Court, Anthony Graham Allardyce is accused of the attempted murder of his wife, Claire Allardyce. It is alleged that on the night of February the 24th, while she was a patient in the intensive care unit of Fulchester General Hospital, he entered the ward where she was under treatment and attempted to take her life. Mr. John Lloyd appears for the prosecution, Miss Janet Dixon for the defence. Mr. Justice Mitchener presides.
So I hope, Mr. Olsen, you will take this reproof very seriously indeed. Mr. Lloyd, I'm sure you will agree that remarks such as the witness has just made are irregular and inadmissible.
Yes, of course, my lord.
Members of the jury, you will disregard the witness's last answer. It is for you to decide what the accused did, if anything. Yes, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, my lord. So, Mr. Olsen, you told Mr. Allardyce that he couldn't have any morphia from you, and he seemed reluctant to accept that fact.
Yes.
What did he reply?
He insisted he wanted the morphia.
As I say, well, what happened in the end?
Well, in the end, eventually, he became rather annoyed and went away. He was pretty upset, I can tell you.
Yes. Did you see him again on that day, which was February the 24th?
Oh, yes.
Where this time?
In the same place, the experimental laboratory. It was 5:45 or 6 in the evening. The staff had gone home and I had returned to the laboratory to lock up. I had fixed some of the cupboards and was turning to the window when suddenly I saw Mr. Allardyce. He was in the shadows, pressed against the wall.
In the shadows? Do you mean he was hiding, Mr. Olsen?
No, he was just there. It gave me a shock to find him, I can tell you.
Yes. Did you ask him what he wanted?
Yes. He said he wanted to talk to me again about the morphia. He seemed more desperate this time. He said he had to have it, and I simply had to help him.
And what did you say this time?
It wasn't easy. The conversation became a little confused.
Yes, of course, but try and tell us what you do remember.
Mr. Allardyce began to talk about life and death. He said, since we all had to die, we must look upon death, accept death, as the natural term of existence. Then he talked about the death of Socrates.
The death of Socrates?
Yes. It was very strange. He said that Socrates, He asked me, did I know anything about? I said, only things I remembered from school. He said that when Socrates was put into jail by his enemies, he was offered the choice of exile or else to drink hemlock. Socrates chose the hemlock as the nobler alternative.
Yes, I see. Well, Mr. Holson, how did you respond to these unusual reflections on the part of the accused?
I simply told him I'd have to close the laboratory and asked him to leave.
Did he go?
Yes. Yes. But I was worried about what he had been saying, so before I left myself, I decided to check the supply of morphia we kept in stores.
And when you did this, what did you find?
Oh, everything was in order.
So was that the end of the matter?
Not quite. 2 days later, I had occasion to check the morphia supply again, this time more carefully.
And did you discover something as a result?
Yes, a particular flask had been tampered with after all. A portion of the morphia in solution had been removed and liquid added to restore its level. About half the contents of the flask had been taken.
May you be shown Exhibit 1, my lord, which is the flask in question and the report of its contents.
This is not disputed by the defence, my lord.
Oh, yes, that is the flask. And the correct analysis. Half the morphia had gone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Olson.
Mr. Olson, when you discovered Mr. Allardyce in the experimental laboratory at about 6 p.m. on February the 24th, what state of mind was he in exactly?
My lord, I hardly think the witness can be expected to answer that question. Mr. Allardyce's state of mind would be known to himself and to no one else.
Yes, I simply ask for appearances, my lord. The witness has told us that he knew the accused well enough.
Yeah.
I would like to know if on that evening he found him his usual self.
He was his usual self, yes.
But you tell us that he was more desperate than when you spoke to him earlier in the day, that his conversation was strange and confused.
Well, he was behaving a little unusually, certainly.
Only a little unusually, with all that rambling on about life and death and Socrates and hemlock and some cock and bull story about an old dog he wanted to put down.
I did not know it was a cock and bull story. I'm only saying what he told me.
Well, did you believe it at the time, even for a moment?
I wondered about it.
Worried about it?
No, I said wondered.
Nevertheless, you have testified that, in fact, you did become worried about it after Mr. Allardyce left you. You went off at once to check the morphia.
Well, that was because he was behaving so very peculiarly.
Peculiarly? Now we're getting to it. Abnormally?
No, I wouldn't say.
Now, if you were being completely frank, Mr. Olson, wouldn't you tell this court that on the evening in question, Mr. Allardyce was behaving nothing like his usual self? That, in fact, he was behaving more like a man who had lost track of himself, moving in a dream, like an automaton?
No. It was strange what he said, but it made sense in its own way. He knew what he was doing right enough.
I have no further questions, my lord.
Does your lordship have any questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Elson. You may leave the witness box.
My lord.
I call Alexander Peter Mitchley. You're Alexander Peter Mitchley, FRCS, and you're a consultant surgeon at Fulchester General Hospital.
That is correct, yes.
Do you know the accused, Anthony Allardyce?
I do. He's the husband of Claire Allardyce, a lady who's been a patient of mine for, about 2 years now.
Yes, would you tell the court about Mrs. Allardyce's illness, please?
Well, Mrs. Allardyce was first referred to me because of abdominal pain she was experiencing, which resisted ordinary medicine. Her GP suspected an intestinal cancer, and unhappily, investigation proved this to be true.
When was this, Mr. Mitchley?
She first came to see me in August 1972, just about 2 years ago. However, the tumour wasn't so developed that we couldn't remove it surgically and hope for a cure. This was a lucky break. About all the luck Claire Allardyce was scheduled for as things turned out.
Yes, I don't think we know what you mean by that last remark, Mr. Mitchley.
Well, with abdominal cancers, it's often the case that the patient doesn't show any symptoms until the condition itself's altogether too far advanced to remedy. So she had been lucky to that extent.
Yes, and this operation was performed when?
The month after, September 1972.
Yes, go on, Mr. Mitchley.
Well, the tumour made a reappearance.
That's the cancer, you mean?
Yes, it was depressing. We'd hoped we'd won. But by early 1973, it became obvious that the trouble was back. We thought we'd try implanting radium in the neoplastic tissue. The X-rays it emanates assists in halting tumour growth. However...
Yes, Mr. Mitchley?
Well, when Mrs. Allardyce went home to convalesce after the operation, she most unfortunately had a fall down some stairs. This was a bad fall and caused serious brain damage. In fact, the result was bulbar paralysis.
Could you explain that technical term, please?
Bulbar paralysis occurs when the medulla and pons of the brain have been affected, so that there's an inability to use the tongue, lips, larynx, and palate. There can also be hemiplegia. That is to say, paralysis of one complete side of the body, face, arm, and leg. This is precisely as it was with Claire Allardyce.
Yes, are you saying that Mrs. Allardyce's fall left her a hopeless invalid?
No. Therapy might well have done something to relieve the paralysis, although progress is slow. Indeed, we readmitted Mrs. Allardyce to hospital to commence such treatment. She's still receiving it.
Is there a real hope of recovery for Claire Allardyce, Mr. Mitchley?
Well, while there's life, there's hope. In medicine, we don't use the word hopeless. No, only difficult.
So, Mr. Mitchley, on the night of February 24th this year, you were at Fulchester General Hospital.
I was. I had operated on Mrs. Allardyce earlier that day. The afternoon had been busy, some minor surgery. Successful, I'm glad to say.
Yes, and the evening?
Well, I'd stayed on to catch up with some paperwork. Just as I was about to go home, I thought I'd take a look in at Mrs. Allardyce. This was at about 10:30. I was walking to the ward when I heard this most extraordinary banging sound. It took me a moment or two to realize that somebody must be trying to break into the side ward where Mrs. Allardyce was.
The side ward is usually kept locked, is it?
Yes. Claire Allardyce's condition required the strictest isolation. Keys were kept by the personnel involved.
So having perceived what was happening, Mr. Mitchley, what did you do?
Well, I went to tell whoever was making such a god-awful racket to stop.
And did you find anyone at the door of the ward trying to break in?
I did.
Who was it?
Anthony Allardyce.
What was your reaction to this intrusion, Mr. Mitchley?
Well, I was astonished. I didn't know what Allardyce was doing in the hospital, or why on earth he was trying to batter a door down. I hadn't seen him since before the operation on his wife, much earlier that day, when, as it happens, we'd had a bit of a set-to.
Yes, a set-to. What kind of a set-to, Mr. Mitchley?
Well, you see, Allardyce hadn't wanted the operation to take place on his wife that day at all. In fact, he'd come to see me just before I went into the theatre to make a final objection. But we had Mrs. Allardyce's consent to surgery, so there could be no question of listening to him. He'd been a bit odd about the whole question of this operation from the outset.
Yes, Mr. Mitchell, this is most important. Can there be any doubt that Mrs. Allardyce was in a fit state to give her consent to the operation on that day?
None whatever. She was in a perfectly clear state of mind. But Allardyce persisted in believing that we weren't acting in his wife's best interests.
What was the precise nature of Mr. Allardyce's objection to the operation on February the 24th?
Well, it was no more precise than his earlier objections. Something to the effect that he thought she'd had enough operations.
No more than that?
Well, in this instance, he also said something about being tired of his wife being used as a guinea pig for doctors, and that he'd come to see it as his overriding duty to safeguard her right to die.
Her right to die?
Well, that was the expression he used, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Now, to return to 10:30 or so on the evening of February the 24th, Mr. Mitchley, you discovered the accused trying to break into the side ward. Well, it goes without saying that you requested him to desist.
Well, it wasn't as easily done as all that, you know. Allardyce was in a, heightened state of mind. He seemed very excited. And he said that he wanted to put his wife where she couldn't be asked for consent to pointless operations anymore.
Yes, Mr. Mitchell, it's most important now to get these words absolutely right. Allardyce said to you that he wanted to put his wife where she couldn't be asked for consent to operations anymore.
Pointless operations.
Pointless operations. Thank you. Please go on.
Well, I told him to stop acting like a damn fool. I said that his wife was in good hands and stood an excellent chance of recovery. At that moment, the ward door opened. Miss Baines, the duty nurse, had apparently heard what was going on from the inside and unlocked it.
What happened next?
Allardyce immediately brushed Miss Baines out of the way, elbowing his way past her.
Did you try to restrain him, Mr. Mitchley?
It became difficult. As he went by, I made a grab for him, but Allardyce came back with a swipe that caught me on the chin, pushed me against the edge of the door where I must have hit my head on something. I don't remember. Anyway, I lost consciousness.
Yes, well, later that evening, Mr. Mitchley, when happily you'd recovered, were you shown a particular surgical instrument by the duty nurse, and did you make an analysis in relation to it?
I did. I was shown this hypodermic syringe, which I was told had been taken from Allardyce in the intensive care unit. Analysis showed that it contained morphia in solution, far in excess of a lethal dose.
Yes, may be shown exhibits 2 and 3. That's the syringe and the analysis of its contents on the night of February the 24th.
Yes, this is the syringe, and this is the analysis report.
The report is an agreed document, my lord, and I have no further questions.
Mr. Mitchley, you tell us that on the morning of February the 24th, just before you went into the operating theatre to perform surgery on his wife, the accused came to you objecting to what you were about to do.
Well, that is perfectly correct, yes.
Now, what was this surgery that Mr. Allardyce was so opposed to?
In point of fact, the surgery on February the 24th was an exploratory operation.
An exploratory operation?
Yes. After we'd implanted the radium in the neoplastic tissues of the affected intestines, it appeared that we'd checked the cancerous growth. But Mrs. Allardyce began to experience fresh pains from what seemed to be a new source. So naturally, we had to take steps to find out why.
Now, when was it that you implanted radium in the intestine again, Mr. Mitchley?
That would have been March 1973.
And how did Mrs. Allardyce respond to this operation?
Well, she wasn't exactly up and about singing the next morning. Abdominal surgery takes more out of a patient than any other form. And as I've already said, Mrs. Allardyce was paralyzed. No, I don't mind telling you, it was touch and go there for a while. She was dependent on oxygen for more than a week after surgery. And beyond that, there had to be sedation and intravenous feeding to cope with post-operative difficulties.
I see. And she became paralyzed when?
July 1973.
Well, is it normal practice, Mr. Mitchley, to carry out exploratory operations on patients suffering from cancer, bulbar paralysis, unable to speak, fed through a tube?
Surgery had to be performed. Mrs. Allardyce was in terrible pain. We had to find out why.
And what, in the event, did your exploratory operation show, Mr. Mitchley?
That there was a secondary cancer, which could either have been a spread from the first or an entirely new condition, this time through to the spleen.
Yes, she was a dying woman, in fact, whom it seems her husband appreciated had the right to meet her end with dignity, but whom you and your surgical team treated, and continue to treat, as a mere guinea pig.
My lord, I'm not sure whether counsel for the defence is here asking questions of the witness, accusing him of something, or simply making speeches in the hope of being quoted in the newspapers.
Do let's get on.
Thank you, my lord. You say you had Mrs. Allardyce's consent to the surgery on February the 24th, and therefore Mr. Allardyce's objections weren't important.
That's it, yes.
Yet, if Mrs. Allardyce was, as you tell us, in very severe pain in the period leading up to the surgery, wouldn't she, in fact, have been under sedation?
It was our duty to keep her pain to a tolerable level, yes.
She was heavily drugged, in other words.
Now, look, you're not going to make me say
Yes
that Mrs.
or
Allardyce
no,
was...
please.
She was under reasonable sedation.
Thank you. Have you saved Mrs. Allardyce's life, Mr. Mitchley?
She's still alive, and we've controlled her cancer.
Permanently?
That's debatable.
She may yet die, then.
Well, the fact is, we're not absolutely certain what to do for the best for Mrs. Allardyce anymore. There are new forms of treatment that may be adopted. But the patient's paralysis prevents any form of treatment from being as effective as it ought to be. And in turn, we can't really assist the paralysis until she returns to some form of reasonable health.
So it could be said that you haven't saved life at all in this case, have you, Mr. Mitchley? You've merely prolonged it. Now, you tell us that on the night of February the 24th, when you found Mr. Allardyce trying to break into the intensive care unit, the accused was in a heightened state of mind, excited.
Yes.
Had you ever known him to be in such a state before?
No. Oh, well, he was in odd enough condition that same morning.
That same morning? Very well. Now, was he violent in the morning?
No.
Or the day before? Or on any occasion previously?
I'm not quite sure what it is you're asking me.
Mr. Mitchley, what sort of man was it you encountered on the night of February the 24th? Was it an Anthony Allardyce you could recognize, or was it somebody completely different?
Ah, now I know what it is you want me to
My
say.
dear Mr. Mitchley, I just want you to tell what is the truth.
You want me to say that Allardyce was in some kind of trance-like state, an automaton or whatever, unaware of what he was doing, but I'm not going to say that because that was not the case. Allardyce was himself. Angry, violent, criminally so in the event, but himself.
He struck you on the chin and knocked you out. Now, that was being himself, was it?
I hit my head on the edge
To
of the
push
door.
the nurse out of his way and then dash into the intensive care unit in possession of a lethally charged hypodermic syringe. That was his normal, healthy, everyday behavior.
I mean that he gave no evidence of being in a trance-like state. It takes pressure on the mind to alter a man so radically. Overwhelming and enduring stress.
And you are suggesting that Anthony Allardyce had no such pressure on his mind, in your view, Mr. Mitchley? Wasn't under the most terrible, inescapable stress? Mr. Mitchley, are you really telling this court that when you performed that last operation on her, there was any real hope for Mrs. Allardyce?
The progress of medicine's so fast that fresh treatments are constantly becoming available. One must not lose hope.
And what hope is there for those suffering from such advanced cases of cancer?
Look, not so very many years ago, a woman with all Claire Allardyce's complications would have been virtually written off by the medical profession, left to die behind screens. But nowadays we can go to her aid. Isn't that a commendable thing? And why doesn't her husband understand it, appreciate it?
Do you know, Mr. Mitchley, he does in his own idiosyncratic way. And that's the source of all the trouble.
The case of the Queen against Allardyce will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. Anthony Allardyce is accused of the attempted murder of his wife Claire, a paralyzed invalid who on February the 24th was in the intensive care unit in Fulchester General Hospital following an operation to arrest an abdominal cancer. Jan Olsen has testified that earlier on the same day, Allardyce approached him at Westway Chemicals, where they both worked, and asked for some morphia. Later, a large quantity was found to be missing. Alexander Mitchley, Mrs. Allardyce's surgeon, says that while he was working at the hospital, he was disturbed by Allardyce trying to break into the intensive care unit. Allardyce declared that he wanted to put his wife where she couldn't be asked for consent to pointless operations anymore. The trial continues with Nurse Baines giving evidence.
I see. Is that the syringe, Miss Baines?
Yes, that seems to be the syringe. It's not the type we usually use, of course.
Yes, thank you. Now, did Mr. Allardyce in fact manage to use that syringe on his wife on the night of February the 24th?
Well, no, thank goodness. I was alone in the ward, so I pressed the alarm, and almost immediately 2 male nurses rushed in from the dormitory attached to the ward. Well, they managed to restrain Mr. Allardyce, and all the fight drained out of him, and he broke down.
In what way broke down?
Well, he was crying.
Was that the end of the incident?
There was something he said, a very curious remark. I'm still not sure what it meant.
Never mind what it meant. What did he say?
He said, you don't understand. She deserves the option given to Socrates. Deserves at least that.
Yes, thank you. Now, Miss Baines, before the night of February the 24th, had you in fact already met Mr. Allardyce?
Yes. Actually, I knew him quite well. I'd nursed Mrs. Allardyce through a large part of her illness, so naturally I'd spoken to Mr. Allardyce when he came to see her, that sort of thing.
Yes. Now, on the night in question, did you find him perceptibly different from the man that you'd known on other occasions?
Well, he was in a very angry mood and violent.
Yes, but would you have said that he seemed unaware of what he was doing or moving in a dream, so to speak?
Well, he seemed entirely clear about what he wanted to do. He wasn't sleepwalking, no.
No. Yes. Thank you, Miss Baines.
Miss Baines, would it be true to say that a relationship sprang up between you and Mrs. Allardyce much closer than is usual between nurse and patient?
Yes. You see, the worst thing in that kind of illness is the isolation, the fact that you're cut off from other human beings. Well, so I decided that things would at least be a little better for Mrs. Allardyce if a way could be found of helping her to communicate.
So what did you do, please?
Well, she could barely move. She couldn't even talk. There was partial use of the right arm and leg, and that was all. So I devised a sort of code by which Mrs. Allardyce could tap out messages. Of course, it was a laborious business and took some working out.
Eventually, then, you found yourself able to communicate with Mrs. Allardyce?
Yes.
Only you?
Well, nobody else knew the code.
Did you from time to time act as interpreter between Mrs. Allardyce and her doctors and also between Mrs. Allardyce and her husband?
Yes, I did.
And there was a particular conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Allardyce on February the 21st last, was there not?
There was.
Will you tell the court about that, please?
Well, Mrs. Allardyce was in a very depressed condition on February the 21st. Having believed her cancer condition cured, she'd begun to suffer pain again, pain that had a different source, and pain that was getting worse. Well, she was upset and frightened. You'd need to understand all that. I can't myself think that anything she communicated that day.
Please, just what was communicated?
Well, Mrs. Allardyce tapped out a message to her husband. It said, "Why can't I die, Tony? Why can't I die? They keep me alive, but I'll never be well again. I wish they would let me die."
And what was the effect of this communication on Mr. Allardyce?
Oh, goodness. What do you imagine was the effect of it? He was shocked, very shocked. Of course, I could see that she didn't really mean it, and I tried to tell him so, but he didn't seem to hear me.
Didn't seem to hear you? Do you mean that Mr. Allardyce began to behave differently at this point?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by differently.
Well, differently from the way he usually behaved, under more pressure, tension.
Well, I don't know that
You
I
see,
could
Miss
say
Baines,
that.
you have stated that Mr. Allardyce was entirely clear about what he was doing when he burst into the intensive care unit on February the 24th. But you must agree that this conversation with his wife on February the 21st could have built up such an enormous pressure on his mind that he simply couldn't know what he was doing 3 days later.
Well, That doesn't follow. He was trying to kill his wife. The rest of us were trying to save her.
Yes, but he just heard her say, why couldn't she die?
But she didn't mean that. She was in despair for a moment.
But do you think Mr. Allardyce understood that?
Well, frankly, I can't say for certain what Mr. Allardyce might have understood and what not. He sometimes struck me as rather a stupid man who heard only what he wanted to hear and believed only what he wanted to believe. Well, many of the pressures on him were of his own making, those about the operation, for instance.
Pressures about which operation?
The operation that eventually took place on February the 24th. Well, Mr. Allardyce got it through his head, for some reason or other, that his wife's consent to that hadn't been properly free.
And was it properly free, Miss Baines? Are you in a position to testify to that fact?
Yes. I interpreted when Mr. Mitchley discussed the matter with Mrs. Allardyce on February the 23rd.
But this was the day before the operation. Now, surely Mrs. Allardyce would have been in very severe pain by then.
Well, that's why there had to be an operation.
And she was under heavy sedation at the time of the consent.
Well, we couldn't let her suffer more than she should.
So, Miss Baines, are you at least prepared to concede that Mr. Allardyce could have had some reason to doubt whether his wife's consent to that operation had been completely free? And that suspicion could have built up in him until he was driven into a kind of stupor by it?
As her nurse, I know that Mrs. Allardyce wanted to live. Apart from that one occasion, she never spoke of death. She knew that everybody in the hospital was working their hardest for her. She respected that, almost as much as she respected the gift of life itself.
Miss Baines.
No re-examination, unless you have any questions, my lord. That completes the case for the prosecution.
Yes, then you may leave the witness box, Miss Baines.
I call the accused Anthony Graham Allardyce. Mr. Allardyce, it's been testified that on the night of February the 24th, you broke into the intensive care unit of Fulchester General Hospital where your wife was confined after surgery. That you resisted the attempts of a doctor and a nurse to restrain you, and then tried to inject your wife with a hypodermic syringe, which has been shown to have contained a lethal dose of morphia. Now, is all that correct?
I expect it must be.
You expect it must be? Then you have no very clear memory of the events of that night?
No, I'm afraid I haven't.
Now, the morphia in the syringe, do you know where you got that? Can you remember?
Well, I think I may have taken that from from Westway Chemicals, where I work. Stolen it, in fact.
Do you say that because you actually remember taking it, or because you've already heard somebody in this courtroom imply that you must have done?
Well, it's hard to be sure about anything that night. I do remember talking to Jan Olsen about the morphia. Yes, in the experimental laboratory. He kept on asking me why I wanted it. Well, it seemed a particularly stupid question, one that didn't really require an answer, and I said something about an old dog in pain. Oh, I didn't mean a dog, literally, of course. Well, I'm not really sure what I meant. Anything.
Yes, Mr. Allardyce.
Well, you see, I was dreadfully worried about my wife at the time. They would keep performing operations on her in Fulchester General. There'd been yet another operation that day, February the 24th. I couldn't see why. It didn't even seem to me that her consent to it could have been really free. I mean, she was under sedation. She was only half conscious. They were prolonging her life, you see, making her live when her time had come to die. She's still dying, you know. She'll never survive her illness, but they keep her there, suffering until the bitter end.
Court will rise.
Now, Mrs. Dixon, is the witness ready to continue?
He is, my lord.
I don't like adjourning a court, unless there is a very good reason. But I'm anxious that the evidence in this case should be very clearly understood by the jury. And as I mentioned yesterday, this may not be easy because a lot of the evidence is to do with the accused's state of mind. Now, I fully understand It must be a great emotional strain for you to give evidence in this case, Mr. Allardyce. But if we are to understand the evidence, then restraint must be exercised. Now, I don't want you to look on this as a reproof to yourself, but more as an encouragement.
I understand, my lord. I'm very grateful.
Mr. Allardyce, on February the 21st, you, with the help of Nurse Baines, communicated with your wife, and she conveyed a message to you, the substance of which was, "Why can't I die? They keep me alive. I wish they would let me die."
Yes. Yes, that was the message, all right.
It was deeply shocking to you, was it, to realize that your wife felt this way?
That's putting it mildly. I was horrified.
Had you known before then that your wife entertained such thoughts?
No. No, you see, ever since her paralysis, Claire had been in a realm where communication, the exchange of ideas, was virtually impossible. I mean, she couldn't speak. She could only make sounds. And a good part of the time, of course, she was drugged into the bargain. So there was hardly any way of knowing how she felt about all that was happening to her. It shook me to the core when I talked to her on the 21st.
Was that communication, in fact, the first genuine communication you had had with your wife since her paralysis?
Yes. Yes, it was. Of course, I was very grateful to Nurse Baines for working out that code, but in view of what was conveyed...
If possible, I would like to know the precise effect this intelligence had on you, Mr. Allardyce. Now, can you be a bit more specific about that?
Well, to begin with, I was just numb. You see, at the back of my mind, I'd half feared that Claire might be in a state of despair. But when she actually said that, I wished they would let me die.
But didn't it occur to you that your wife might only temporarily have been dismayed by her condition and simply needed encouragement and consolation?
No. No, it didn't. You see, all I could think of was Claire, trapped in her own body, unable to escape.
You thought of your wife's affliction in those terms, did you?
Yes, more and more as the days went on.
Just a minute, Mrs. Dixon. Mr. Allardyce, I think it is important that we get this quite clear. You are saying that as a result of this communication with your wife, in which she expressed a wish for death, you conceived a notion that she should be granted her wish, and this grew on you until you became possessed by it.
That's so, my lord. You see, doctors and nurses, well, they're dedicated people. They give their lives for others. But with the present methods available to medical science, they can keep people living long after life is over, properly speaking. It's happening all the time.
Yes. Yes, well, we're not here to discuss the merits or otherwise of the medical profession, but only their effects upon you. Now, you were in such a state of mind that you began to fear your wife's doctors. You were obsessed with this notion that they were artificially preserving her life. Is that what you are saying?
Yes.
Yes, I see. Yes, Mrs. Dixon.
My lord. Mr. Allardyce, have you and your wife always enjoyed a good relationship?
Yes. We've been married 15 years. We've always loved each other.
Do you have any children?
No. No, that was a disappointment, of course, but it drew us closer together. We came to mean a tremendous amount to each other.
You would hardly then willingly and consciously wish bodily harm, let alone death, to your wife?
No, never.
Mr. Allardyce, are you a violent man?
I hope not.
Well, have you ever been involved in any sort of brawl or sought to impose your will upon others by the use of force?
No, never.
And yet on the night of February the 24th at Fulchester General Hospital, you knocked down Mr. Mitchley, twice pushed Nurse Baines out of your way, and then attempted to inject your wife with a lethal dose of morphia.
Yes. Well, I can't really explain all that.
Why did you choose morphia, Mr. Allardyce?
Well, I thought morphia would be painless, end things easily. All that mattered was that Claire was suffering dreadfully, and nobody was doing anything about it, least of all her doctors.
Thank you, Mr. Allardyce. Would you wait there, please?
Well, Mr. Allardyce, one thing at least stands out in your testimony. You obviously don't hold a very high opinion of the medical profession.
I didn't say anything like that. I simply believe that there's a time to be born and a time to die, and doctors these days don't always seem to share that view.
Yes, well, do you wish then that your homicidal attack on your wife on February the 24th had been successful?
I beg your pardon?
Well, surely whatever strange state of mind you'd got yourself into, as you've told us that you believed your wife's life was being artificially preserved, you must therefore have wanted her death.
That's not the way to put it.
And you still must want it. You've insisted she's still a dying woman, still being kept alive.
Yes, that is true, basically.
Well, then let's be honest. You obviously regret that your attack on her failed.
No, you're assuming that when
Well, then you're not seriously going to tell us that you've now changed your whole outlook on life simply because you're here on a criminal charge, are you? And that you now wish your wife to live as long as possible, the beneficiary of every survival technique known to modern medicine? Do you believe in euthanasia, Mr. Allardyce?
My lord, I must object. The question is surely too general. The subject of euthanasia is vast. We shall be here forever if my learned friend asks that sort of question.
Yes, Mr. Lloyd, perhaps you might try a different approach.
Yes, as your lordship wishes. Mr. Allardyce, it's true, is it not, that you approve of the way Socrates chose to die?
Yes, yes it is.
Well, could you tell us of the circumstances of his death, please?
Well, others have already done that.
Yes, but I'm sure it would assist to hear it from you.
Well, Socrates was a Greek philosopher who became compromised by his enemies. He was convicted on false charges, and he was given the option of either going into exile for his crimes or of taking poison. Knowing that the other alternative would only have debased him, he chose the poison, hemlock. To Socrates, that was the nobler, the more dignified option.
And you see some sort of principle relating to your wife's case in all this, do you?
I certainly see that when death is inevitable, it should be accepted. Accepted and even received gratefully. There's something inhuman in all this scraping and scratching for a few more hours of life that seems to go on in so many hospitals today.
And yet who's to say when death is an inevitability? Was death an inevitability for Socrates when he took the hemlock, would you say?
Well, to have accepted exile would have been to cheapen him and to make him look cowardly. He knew that.
Yes, well, Mr. Mitchley has told us that whilst there's life, there's hope, Mr. Allardyce. Now, surely your wife had at least the hope of a cure sooner or later.
Yes, look, this isn't what I was trying to say.
Well, you can't be trying to say that death was an inevitability for your wife on February the 24th, when even you have got to admit that she's very much alive today.
Yes, but it's a half-life. She's paralyzed, constantly in need of sedation.
Yes, well, that statement involves an evaluation of the quality of life. Now, you surely wouldn't want doctors to be free to do that, would you?
No, I suppose not.
No, well, then you must recognise that a doctor's first duty is to save his patient's life at all costs.
Yes, but what's a life? You're only asking when death should be allowed to occur. Shouldn't a man also ask, what's there to live for?
Yes, well, you've obviously thought these matters out, Mr. Allardyce, and you've come to some very sophisticated conclusions.
One can't avoid thinking about
And are these the considerations that drove you into your dream-like state?
Yes, yes, they are.
Well, you experienced no problem in continuing to be articulate about them, even whilst you were sleepwalking.
I'm sorry?
Well, on February the 24th, you were most articulate, weren't you, Mr. Allardyce? You gave Mr. Olson quite a little lecture on death as the natural term of existence, even while you were so unsure in your mind that you don't remember stealing the morphia.
Now, look.
You also told Mr. Mitchley, in very precise terms, that you meant to put your wife where she couldn't be asked for consent to pointless operations anymore. And finally, when prevented from killing your wife, you came back to Socrates, explaining that your wife at least deserved the option given to him. At least that.
Well, those ideas were very much in my mind at the time. They were the nature of the obsession.
Oh, I see. It's a talking as well as a walking dream. Sort of coherent automaton.
I didn't know what I was doing that night.
Only what you were thinking.
No, you can't even say that. It's all a blur.
Well, to descend with a thump to the purely practical level, Mr. Allardyce, where did you get that hypodermic syringe? We don't know about that, do we? We've heard about how you stole the morphia, but not the syringe. Well, I don't expect that they leave hypodermic syringes lying around in experimental laboratories of chemical factories, do they? Or do they?
I don't know how I got hold of that syringe. I don't know where it came from.
Well, now there's a coincidence, you see, because neither do we. You see, Mr. Allardyce, the prosecution has made very determined efforts to track down the origin of that syringe, but we can't seem to find an owner for it. We found out that it's a faintly obsolete instrument, it would seem, of a fairly standard make. But whose, Mr. Allardyce, and where did it come from?
I don't know. The hospital must have had some.
No, Mr. Allardyce. The evidence is that that syringe does not come from the hospital because they no longer use that type there.
Well, Mr. Allardyce, counsel for the prosecution has raised an important point here.
It's all so mixed up. Honestly, God knows how I came by that syringe. It must have been lying around the hospital somewhere. I mean, nurses do get careless, don't they?
Look, the fact is you weren't in such a dazed and automative state as you'd like to make out, were you, Mr. Allardyce? Because you'd otherwise stolen or procured that syringe long in advance.
How dare you say a thing like
in spite of your counsel's objection to the question, you do subscribe to a general notion of euthanasia, don't you? Destruction of the unfit. Those who are a burden on the rest of us.
I simply believe that life should not be artificially prolonged when it's no longer true life.
Or when it critically inconveniences others, that's to say. Because ever since your wife's illness, she's been a millstone round your neck, hasn't she?
No.
A constant worry to you.
No.
A trouble, a burden.
No, you listen to me. Some of these damn doctors today, they think they're God Almighty, with the power to decide when men shall live and when they shall die. You know, when they've got a poor wretch on something like that heart-lung machine, drip-fed, sedated, they can keep him living, if you can call it that, for years. Well, it's true. Well, last February it was my wife that they were playing their games with. My wife, Claire, I couldn't permit that, could I? I couldn't.
Join us tomorrow for the final day of the Queen against Allardyce in the Crown Court. Anthony Allardyce is accused of the attempted murder of his paralyzed wife, Claire. On the night of February the 24th, he broke into the intensive care unit of Fulchester General Hospital where she was confined. Despite attempts by Mr. Mitchley, his wife's surgeon, and nurse Sarah Baines to stop him, he tried to inject his wife with a hypodermic syringe which was found to contain a lethal dose of morphia. It's been shown that Allardyce obtained the morphia from the experimental laboratory controlled by Jan Olsen at his place of work, Westway Chemicals. But prosecuting counsel has made much of the fact that he may have obtained the syringe earlier with premeditation, attempting to show that on the night of February the 24th, Anthony Allardyce was in a non-responsible, automaton-like state. The defense continues.
You are Hilary Southern, and you are a member of the Order of Preachers, that is to say, a Dominican friar.
I am, and that is correct.
Have you also certain medical qualifications?
I have an MB, and I specialize in psychological medicine.
Do you know the accused, Anthony Allardyce?
Well, yes, I know Tony very well. I hope I can say we're good friends.
Would you tell the court where you first met the accused?
It was at a conference concerned with industrial stress problems. The subject was merely of general interest to me, but Tony attended as his firm's personnel manager.
And you came to know each other quite well, you say?
I happened to mention in conversation that I had recently written an article for an academic journal, on the medical and moral problems involved in formulating a definition of death. Goodness knows how the talk turned to that. One gets onto some odd topics drinking before lunch. But Tony then told me that he was dreadfully worried about his wife, a desperately ill woman whom he'd come to believe was being kept alive artificially.
Did you see Mr. Allardyce on certain other occasions after this, Father?
I did. As his concern for his wife increased, he took to dropping into the friary to talk things over. He came on 4 separate occasions, I think.
Now, you say your article, which attracted the interest of the accused, was concerned with medical and moral problems involved in formulating a definition of death. Could you say a little more about this, please?
If I can. The unhappy fact is a definition of death seems to be needed these days. In the past, even as little as 30 years ago, there was no real problem. The heart stopped, respiration ceased, that was that. Survival techniques developed since the war, however, and of course the huge advances in surgery generally, have made it seem that it isn't as simple as that. The appearances of life can be maintained perhaps long after life in any meaningful form has ceased. You can keep respiration going, stimulate the heart indefinitely, feed intravenously. But what sort of life is that? Well, it eventually became known that conscious life ceases with deoxygenation of the brain. So was brain death the criterion? If it was, shouldn't it just be allowed to happen? By stopping the survival techniques, you see, you commence the deoxygenation process. It's complete in minutes.
Is there any agreement among doctors at the present moment, Father, as to when conditions of death may infallibly be said to be present?
It's difficult. This is no doubt where the medical problem becomes a moral one. One doctor will continue fighting for his patient's life long after another has decided that there's no hope. Presumably, the responsible doctor lets his patient die when he feels that there's simply no further chance of continuing conscious life without artificial aids. But there again, when is that? The next surgery you've been pondering, the next therapy could make all the difference. It could be the turning point.
Let's come to moralists then, Father. What have they to say on this question?
Oh, well, following their traditional practice of remaining 50 years behind the issues, moralists have adopted a most ambivalent attitude towards life and death. On the one hand, they regard life as a good, the preservation of life as desirable, yet they also cheerfully allow that a man may put his life at risk by climbing mountains, racing cars, even entering wars as a mercenary. Hard, then, to see why, when it's a question of human beings in terminal conditions, so many moralists should suddenly insist that everything possible must be done to save life.
But surely very few moralists would put it as strongly as that these days, Father Southern. I mean, some would even advocate euthanasia, would they not? Voluntary euthanasia.
Some would, my lord. I'm not sure myself that the matter should ever be put in such absolute terms. Better perhaps to say that there would seem to be no obligation on a man to postpone his death if and when he sees it coming. All other things being equal, I'm not compelled to have an operation just because my doctor says it'll prolong my life. I certainly don't have to accept survival techniques.
Yes. Well, I don't see how precisely this is relevant to our case here today. The accused is facing charges of deliberately attempting the killing of his wife. The opinions of moralists won't get us further on that way, will they?
Oh, on the contrary, my lord, it's my belief that the accused may have acted as he did because he was disturbed by precisely this ambivalence in contemporary moralists.
Father Southern.
Indeed.
My lord. On the occasions when Mr. Allardyce visited you at the Friary, did you speak of modern ethical approaches to life and death?
We did. Tony wanted some instant solution to his problems. All that I've just said should make it clear that such a thing isn't really possible. He thus became resentful. I could see the discontent building in him with successive visits.
What sort of proportions did this discontent eventually assume?
It's not going too far to say that he became obsessed. He began to seek precedents of some sort. Eventually, he chose as a paradigm the death of Socrates.
Why did he do that exactly, Father Southern? Can you tell us?
Well, apart from anything else, he got the idea that his wife's consent to continuing surgery wasn't completely free. She was heavily drugged a good deal of the time, you see. So he made up his mind that she didn't truly have the power of decision. And this, in his reading, was the same thing as her being denied the option given to Socrates.
And did you discuss this point of view with him?
I told him it wasn't an accurate analogy. Unlike Socrates, his wife was hardly in the hands of her enemies. But that's where the whole thing went wrong. He decided her doctors were her enemies.
Can you tell us more about his state of mind at this time, Father Southern?
Tony came to a point where the argument was all to him. He was conscious of little else. He could reason, talk coherently within that context, not within any other.
Would you say that his state was perhaps that of an automaton as a result?
He was entirely compelled, that's true. A man driven by forces above and beyond him. An automaton, yes.
To be said to be acting like an automaton, a man must be in a dazed condition, must he? Stupefied.
I don't see that necessarily follows.
Are you telling us, then, that in your opinion, Mr. Allardyce could have been in an automative, sleepwalking state when he made the attack upon his wife on February the 24th?
I must point out that, my lord, that I last saw Tony on February the 22nd. He was then in a state of deep distress, and because he'd been in communication with his wife and learnt that she apparently wished she could die. Now, the trauma that produced in him may have dispersed 2 days later, but I, for one, should doubt it. In view of what happened, in fact, I'm convinced it didn't.
Thank you, Father Southern.
Well, Father Southern, I suppose one should at least give you an A for effort.
I beg your pardon.
Well, in a number of years at the bar, I've heard a great many experts debate what the automative state should truly be, but never before one who blandly insisted that it was precisely the opposite of everything that jurists have written about.
Now I don't follow you.
Well, are you seriously going to tell the jury that this blank-minded sleepwalking state that the law recognizes is in fact a highly active, articulate, and even argumentative state?
I am saying that there's precisely no reason why it shouldn't be. Not all sleepwalkers drift silently about, arms outstretched, you know.
And neither do most of them deliver long, coherent lectures on ancient Greek philosophy, Father. And then again, are you going to tell us that a man acting like an automaton could steal some morphia, carefully cover up the theft, and obtain a hypodermic syringe in circumstances that can only suggest premeditation?
My lord, the accused has already stated that he does not remember how he acquired the syringe, and no evidence has been brought forward to suggest how, in fact, he did acquire it.
Yes, I think we're entitled to inquire what state of mind he might have been in order to acquire it at all, Mrs. Dixon. Yes, Mr. Lloyd.
Yes, thank you, my lord. And finally, Father Southern, if your good friend, the accused, was in such a dangerous mental state as you maintain he was on February the 22nd, why did you simply let him walk away to wreak whatever havoc might result?
Well, I don't say I recognized his state altogether clearly on February the 22nd.
Oh, you prefer to recognize it now, in retrospect?
Not prefer, feel obliged to.
And you would agree, would you, Father, that most psychologists would find your analysis of the automaton state, well, shall we say, original?
I'm afraid I have no information on that.
Oh, come on, Father, you're in court on oath.
I grant that many would take a less elastic view, but that doesn't alter the fact that there is absolutely no reason why an articulate state should not go hand in hand with a sleepwalking condition. You can't dogmatize. These things aren't precise.
These things aren't precise. Yes, I'm sure the jury will ponder that last observation very carefully. Thank you, Father. No further questions.
Does your lordship have any questions?
No. You may leave the witness box, Father.
I call Mrs. Claire Allardyce.
Claire Allardyce, please.
My lord, Mrs. Allardyce's medical advisers, including Mr. Mitchley, have allowed that she should be brought to the court today for a brief period only. Her hearing is unimpaired, but she's unable to communicate except through the code known to her and Nurse Baines. I'm therefore going to request that Nurse Baines should be allowed to act as interpreter.
Any objection to this, Mr. Lloyd?
No, my lord. It is no doubt rather unusual, but the circumstances are most unusual.
Yes, indeed they are. I'm not at all sure that I should allow the testimony in this form.
Is your lordship giving a direction to the
Well,
court?
it might be worth asking Mrs. Dixon why Mrs. Allardyce's testimony couldn't have been in the form of a sworn deposition.
Well, naturally, my lord, the course was considered. However, when approached with the suggestion, Mrs. Allardyce rejected it. She stated through her interpreter that if she was going to give evidence at all, she would appear in court to do so.
Very well. Miss Baines, would you please step forward? I would be grateful also for the attendance of Mr. Mitchley, just for a few moments. Mr. Mitchley, I think you can help us in two respects. First, I would like to know, to be assured that this will not be too much of an ordeal for Mrs. Allardyce. And secondly, I must know if she is under sedation now. And if so, to what extent?
Well, as you've heard, my lord, Mrs. Allardyce was so anxious to appear in court today, we decided to comply with her wishes at all costs. As to the other matter, if you'll excuse me a moment, my lord. Mrs. Allardyce's dosage has been reduced for today as agreed. This means, of course, that she may be in a certain amount of pain. But again, she has insisted on this herself, so there can be no possible question of her mental alertness.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchley. Let the witness be sworn. Read the oath to her.
Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes, Mrs. Dixon.
Mrs. Allardyce, the court has been told that on February the 24th last, your husband, the accused, entered the intensive care unit where you were confined and made an attempt on your life. Now, do you recall anything of these events?
She says no. She was drugged at the time, unconscious.
Did you then, with the help of Nurse Baines, conduct a conversation with your husband on February the 21st?
Yes.
Could you let us know what was said?
I needed another operation. Tony had been so good all through my illness, strong. I didn't want him to suffer any more.
Mrs. Allardyce, did you also communicate the words, "They keep me alive. I wish they would let me die"?
Yes.
And what was the effect of this on your husband? Can you tell us?
Terrible. I thought he would go mad. Sorry, I said it. I didn't mean it.
You didn't mean it? But was it obvious to you that your husband thought you meant it?
Yes.
And were you able to correct this impression with him afterwards?
No.
I see. Now, on February the 23rd, Mrs. Allardyce, your doctor, Mr. Mitchley, asked your consent to a further operation to deal with your cancer condition. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was your consent to that operation completely free and conscious?
I think so.
You love your husband deeply, do you, Mrs. Allardyce?
Very deeply.
Do you have any reason to believe that he does not love you?
Tony is so worried about me. Only ever wanted what he thought was best for me.
Thank you, Mrs. Allardyce.
Mrs. Allardyce, I'm most anxious not to tire you any further, but there are one or two questions that I must ask. Now, you say after your communication with your husband on February the 21st, in which natural depression made you imply you wished to die, you were never able to correct that impression with him.
Yes.
But did your husband attempt to seek any further information from you on that point?
No.
And even though Nurse Baines tried to reassure him on your behalf, he didn't listen to her?
No.
Thank you. Now, this question of your consent to the operation on February the 23rd, did your husband ever discuss this with you or communicate with you at any time to discover if your consent had been given quite freely?
No.
Thank you. And apart from your moment of despair on February the 21st, you have, throughout your illness, sought any treatment or surgery that might be calculated to aid your condition. You have, in fact, sought life and not death.
I know now I am dying. I can't live much longer. So you don't understand. Only Tony understood. To die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain.
Thank you, Mrs. Allardyce.
That completes the case for the defence, my lord.
Very well, Mrs. Allardyce may leave the court, nurse.
So, members of the jury, this has obviously been a moving and in some senses heart-rending case, but it is important to say that even though natural pity and compassion are aroused, we must resolutely put the emotional considerations on one side and deal only with the evidence. Now, the sole line of defence throughout this case has been that the accused, Anthony Allardyce, was in a sleepwalking or automaton-like state on the night of February the 24th when he made the attack on his wife in Fulchester General Hospital. And this is consequently the only issue to be considered. We're not here to debate the rights and wrongs of euthanasia, but simply to ask the question, did Anthony Allardyce know what he was doing when he broke into the intensive care unit? So let us look at that evidence. Now, when Anthony Allardyce stole morphia from Westway Chemicals, he didn't simply go into the laboratory and take a flask. He carefully poured out a sufficient quantity of morphia from the flask, refilled the flask with water, and then replaced it so that the theft was obviously covered up. Now, was that the act of a sleepwalker? And again, Allardyce also mysteriously acquired the hypodermic syringe. Now, those of you who know hospitals will agree that it could hardly have been left lying around, as he says. Now, you've heard Father Southern say that Allardyce's behaviour could go hand in hand with the automative state. But even Father Southern has admitted that a great many experienced psychologists would disagree with him. And more important than Father Southern's opinion is the factual evidence given by the three people who actually saw Allardyce on the night in question. That's Mr. Mitchley, Mr. Olsen, and Nurse Baines, who all disagree that he was moving in a dream or in a sleepwalking state. No members of the jury, no matter what Anthony Allardyce's motives were, and whether you agree with them or not, the evidence is that on the night of February the 24th, he knew what he was doing. And on that evidence, you must find him guilty.
But the question to ask in determining whether or not Anthony Allardyce behaved in an automative condition on February the 24th is first and foremost whether or not he acted characteristically. Now, a man who is himself will behave as he normally does, even under stress. But a man who has entered a new and compulsive state will behave very differently. Well, there was certainly nothing normal about Anthony Allardyce's behaviour on February the 24th. He is a non-violent man, but he knocked out Mr. Mitchley with a savage blow and twice pushed Nurse Baines out of his way. He is an honest man, but he stole morphia, and from somewhere or other, a hypodermic syringe. And finally, although he loves his wife deeply and she him, he attempted to kill her. Now, counsel for the prosecution has tried to dismiss Father Hilary Southern's evidence by simple disparagement. But remember, he is a specialist in psychological medicine, and one must respect what he has to say. In his opinion, Anthony Allardyce is a man who could well be driven into a confused and hopeless state of mind by the complex problem of death and survival techniques. He could be driven into a bitterly confused and hopeless state of mind, and he could, out of sheer frustration, act compulsively. That is to say, like an automaton.
Yours is now a very difficult task, members of the jury. There is a defence, rare in criminal law, called automatism. And it has the effect that if a person does something wrong, but was at that time in an unconscious state, like a sleepwalker, he is excused the consequence of his wrongdoing. Now, it is perfectly true that automatism does not positively preclude articulate speech and reasoning. A sleepwalker has been known to exchange coherent remarks with others. But there is the evidence that the talk of the accused on the night of February the 24th was lucid and argumentative, all that you might expect from a man who had all his wits about him. And then there is the evidence that he acquired the morphia, and when he did so, he covered up his theft. And learned counsel for the prosecution may be quite right to suggest, in the absence of other evidence, that he used similar guile in obtaining the hypodermic syringe. Now, the accused admits that he broke into that hospital ward with a lethally charged hypodermic syringe. But here you must consider very carefully the evidence given as to the accused's state of mind by Father Hilary Southern, a medically qualified man. Before you can bring in a verdict of guilty, the prosecution must have shown to your entire satisfaction that the accused, when he made that attack upon his wife, knew what he was doing. Will you now please retire and consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the defendant, Anthony Graham Allardyce, guilty or not guilty of attempted murder?
Guilty.
Is that the verdict of you all?
It is.
In view of the mitigating circumstances, Mr. Justice Mitchener gave Anthony Allardyce a short sentence of 6 months imprisonment. Next week, when our cameras return and the jury assess the facts in another leading case in the Crown Court.